This is the story of Nneka, a woman who lived a life defined by love, devotion, and the warmth of her family. But when betrayal tore her world apart and she was cast out of her home with her 3 daughters, Nneka's courage and faith were put to the ultimate test. Through years of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering perseverance, she and her daughters rose from hardship to greatness, proving that true strength is born from resilience, love, and faith. Welcome to Afrotales by Zizandra, home of storytelling. Nneka's life had always been defined by love, devotion, and the warmth of her family. From the moment she married Obinna, she poured every drop of herself into building a home that glowed with happiness. She was beautiful, not only in the fairness of her face and the grace of her steps, but in the kindness that radiated from her heart. Her 3 daughters, Ugo, the bright and responsible 14-year-old, Kamsi, the curious and ever-smiling 7-year-old, and little Oluchi, only 4, whose laughter could melt the hardest of hearts, were the treasures of her existence. Each day began with their giggles echoing through the compound as they ran to her side, and each night ended with Nneka whispering prayers over their sleeping forms. To her, they were more than enough. They were gifts from God, her crown and her joy. She worked tirelessly to ensure they were well-fed, well-dressed, and surrounded by love. Yet, beneath the surface of her happy home, a storm was brewing, a storm that would test every ounce of her strength. For while Nneka's heart beat only for her husband and daughters, Obinna's heart had slowly begun to harden, poisoned by the venomous whispers of his relatives. They mocked him in the area, laughing that he had no son to carry his name, no heir to inherit his land. A man without a son is no man at all, they jeered, their words digging like thorns into his pride. At first, Obinna had brushed them aside, but over time their laughter turned into a chorus that echoed in his ears day and night until it became unbearable. The change was subtle at first. Obinna stopped smiling when his daughters ran to greet him at the door. He grew cold during meals, often eating in silence while Nneka tried to fill the air with stories of the girls' achievements. When Ugo proudly showed him her report card, standing tall as she announced that she had taken first position in class, his only reply was a grunt of dissatisfaction. Kamsi's innocent chatter about how she wanted to become a doctor one day went unanswered, and little Oluchi's drawings, proudly held up with tiny hands, were brushed aside as nonsense. Nneka noticed these shifts with a heavy heart, but she clung to hope, praying each night that her husband would come back to himself. She reminded him of their early days, of the vows they had made, of the laughter they once shared under the stars. But Obinna was already drifting, his mind shackled by the weight of tradition and the harsh voices of his family. He began to withdraw not only his affection, but also his support, often disappearing for long hours and returning with bitterness etched across his face. Nneka's heart ached as she watched the distance between them grow wider, but for the sake of her children, she wore a brave smile, covering her wounds with strength only a mother could muster. Then came the evening that would shatter everything. The sun had set, leaving the compound cloaked in shadows, and Nneka had just finished preparing a simple meal of yam and palm oil for her family. The children sat close to her, their eyes bright with hunger and anticipation, their little voices filling the air with laughter. Obinna arrived home, but instead of joining them, he stood at the doorway with a look so cold it sent a chill through Nneka's soul. Without sitting, without eating, he began to speak, his words heavy with finality. "Pack your things and leave," he said flatly. At first, Nneka thought she had misheard. She looked up, confusion clouding her face, and asked softly, "What do you mean?" But Obinna's voice rose, sharp as a whip. "Leave this house. You and your daughters. I have no use for you. I need sons, not daughters who will marry and carry another man's name." The children froze, Ugo clutching Kamsi's hand as Oluchi's small face crumpled in fear. Nneka fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she pleaded with him. "Obinna, please. These are your children, your own flesh and blood. Don't do this to us. I have given you love. I have stood by you. If it is a son you desire, let us pray. Let us wait. God's time is the best." But Obinna's heart had turned to stone. His relatives' voices echoed louder than her cries, and with a wave of his hand, he summoned the gatekeeper to throw them out. The night air was unforgiving as Nneka and her daughters found themselves standing outside their home with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Neighbors peeked through windows, whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads in pity, others smirking at the spectacle. Nneka held her children close, her tears soaking their hair as she tried to steady her breaking heart. "Don't cry, my babies," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We may have lost a house, but as long as we have each other, we still have a home." Her words were brave, but inside, she felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath her. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, and the weight of survival pressed heavily upon her shoulders. Ugo clung tightly to her mother, silently vowing in her young heart to protect her sisters no matter the cost. Kamsi's eyes glistened with tears, while little Uluchi buried her face in Nneka's wrapper, too young to understand why her father had turned them away. And so, with nothing but faith to guide her steps, Nneka took her daughters by the hand and walked into the night, not knowing where the path would lead but determined to keep moving. Her story of resilience had begun, though the pain of betrayal still lingered fresh in her chest. For the woman who once had everything, love, comfort, and security, was now left with nothing but her children, her tears, and the fragile hope that tomorrow might bring a glimmer of light after the storm. The night Obinna cast Nneka and her daughters out of their home became a haunting memory etched into their souls. The neighbors who once greeted her warmly with smiles now peered through half-open windows and whispered as her belongings were hurled into the dirt like refuse. The children clung to her wrapper, trembling as Obinna's relatives cheered him on, their voices dripping with malice. "You are not fit to bear his name," one of them sneered, spitting near her feet. Ugo, though only 10, tried to defend her mother, her small fists clenched at her sides. But Nneka held her back, whispering through tears, "Do not fight them, my child. Our God sees everything." With each insult hurled at her and each item thrown outside, Nneka's dignity was trampled underfoot. Finally, the compound gates were slammed shut with a metallic clang, leaving her and the girls standing in the cold night with nowhere to go. The familiar walls that once echoed with laughter had now become an impenetrable fortress of rejection, and the streets stretched before them like an endless wilderness. They wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, the darkness pressing against them like a heavy cloak. When they stopped to ask distant relatives for help, the doors closed swiftly in their faces. One cousin muttered excuses about not having enough space. Another lied outright, claiming illness in the house. The rejection stung deeper than hunger ever could. Ugo tried to be strong, holding her sister's hands tightly, but tears betrayed her as Kamsi whimpered from exhaustion and Uluchi begged to be carried. Nneka lifted her youngest despite her own fatigue, whispering words of comfort she herself could barely believe. Eventually, they stumbled upon a small church where the wooden benches became their beds. The stone floor was cold, and the mosquitoes relentless, but at least the roof sheltered them from the night sky. In the silence of that church, Nneka knelt before the altar, her tears soaking the wooden floor, begging God for strength. Her daughters gathered around her, whispering their own childlike prayers, and for a fleeting moment, faith warmed their shivering bodies. By day, survival became their only mission. Nneka gathered firewood from the outskirts of the village, carrying heavy bundles on her head to sell in the market for a few naira. Her body grew sore from the daily strain, but her spirit refused to bow. Ugo quickly stepped into her role as her mother's right hand, helping to sort, bundle, and even sell the wood when her mother's strength faltered. The girl's sharp tongue and fearless attitude earned her small respect from customers who often dismissed her as just a child. Kamsi, though younger, helped by watching Uluchi and fetching water when needed, while Uluchi, with her innocent chatter, softened the hearts of a few sympathetic strangers who sometimes dropped coins into her tiny hands. Yet there were days when their efforts yielded almost nothing. On such nights, the children went to bed with empty stomachs, their mother's heart breaking as she watched them struggle to sleep. But even in the hunger, she reminded them, "This is not the end of our story. One day, people will hear of your greatness." Humiliation, however, continued to shadow them. Children in the neighborhood mocked Ugo and Kamsi, calling them bastards without a home. Some adults turned up their noses as they passed, pretending not to hear their greetings. But within the cruelty lay the forging of resilience. Ugo began to carry herself with a quiet defiance, shielding her sisters from taunts and insults, refusing to let the world crush their spirits. Kamsi poured her pain into her studies whenever she managed to attend school, while little Uluchi clung to hope with the innocence of a child, asking her mother nightly, "When will we go back home?" Nneka never had an answer, but she held her close and whispered, "Soon, my child. Soon." And though the journey ahead was filled with hardship, the seeds of perseverance were already taking root in their hearts, preparing them for a future that even the cruelty of man could not destroy. As the months rolled into years, the rhythm of hardship began to shape Nneka and her daughters into something stronger than even they could comprehend. Life on the streets, with its endless trials, had carved resilience into their souls. Ugo, now stepping into her teenage years, took on responsibilities far beyond her age. Each morning, she rose before dawn, shaking the sleep from her weary eyes, and accompanied her mother to the market. She had learned the art of persuasion, her once timid voice now carrying the confidence of someone who had wrestled with life and refused to lose. She bargained with traders, carried baskets heavier than her small frame should have borne, and sometimes endured insults hurled at her for being a child in a place meant for adults. Yet, she did it all with a fierce determination that came from the promise she had whispered to her mother on those cold church benches, that one day, she and her sisters would make her proud. Kamsi, though younger, was no less remarkable. With her quick mind and insatiable curiosity, she excelled in school whenever Nneka managed to scrape together enough to send her, even if only part-time. She devoured her books by candlelight, often reading aloud to Oluchi, who clapped her hands in delight at every new story. Oluchi herself, though still small, carried a spark that lit up their darkest nights. Her innocence reminded them all of what they were fighting for, and her laughter, though less frequent now, was like a balm to Nneka's weary heart. The sacrifices Nneka made to keep her daughter's dreams alive were immense. There were nights she went to bed hungry, having given her portion of food to the children, and mornings she rose with aching limbs but pushed forward anyway. When her firewood business grew too slow, she picked up other jobs, fetching water, sweeping compounds, carrying loads at the market, all to gather enough coins for her daughter's survival. Her palms became calloused, her back bent with toil, yet her spirit never broke. She often knelt by their bedside, whispering prayers over their heads, asking God to protect and guide them, to turn their tears into testimonies. And though her heart carried the scar of Obina's betrayal, she channeled the pain into fuel for their future. Every time she watched Ugo haggling in the market, every time she saw Kamsi bent over a borrowed book, every time Oluchi's laughter rang out, despite their poverty, Nneka's hope was rekindled. She believed, with a faith that refused to die, that their story would not end in suffering. Life, however, did not grant them respite without first testing their endurance further. There were days of sickness when Kamsi's small body burned with fever, and Nneka sat by her side all night, fanning her with trembling hands, praying she would see the dawn. There were days when the money from sales barely bought a handful of Gary, and Ugo would volunteer to go without so her younger sisters could eat. Hunger became a familiar ache, yet it never quenched their determination. Neighbors who once mocked them began to marvel at their persistence, whispering among themselves about Nneka's strength and the daughter's courage. Some, moved by compassion, occasionally dropped food at their doorstep or gave old clothes for the girls to wear. Still, the journey was long and filled with struggle. But within those struggles lay the seeds of greatness. Each sacrifice, each tear, each whispered prayer was planting roots that would one day bear fruit far beyond what any of them could imagine. Years passed, and slowly the signs of change began to emerge. Ugo grew into a young woman of striking intelligence and responsibility, her leadership within the family undeniable. Kamsi's brilliance in her studies began to draw the attention of her teachers, who marveled at how a child from such a background could display such exceptional talent. Oluchi, too, began to show promise, her creativity and sharp mind making her stand out among her peers. And through it all, Nneka remained their anchor, their guiding star in the storm. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was overshadowed by the quiet victories that came day by day. They were no longer just surviving, they were beginning to rise. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. The seeds of resilience that had been sown in the depths of their suffering were beginning to sprout, and a new chapter of their story was unfolding, one that would soon astonish not only those who once mocked them but even the man who had cast them aside. The years that followed were marked by a slow but steady transformation. What once seemed impossible began to take shape, though only through unimaginable toil and sacrifice. Nneka's firewood business grew bit by bit. At first, she carried the bundles alone, her body bowed beneath the weight, but over time she managed to save enough to buy a wooden wheelbarrow. It was old and creaked loudly with every push, but it saved her from the crushing burden on her head and allowed her to carry more at once. With this small advantage, her daily sales increased, and the money she earned began to stretch a little further. Ugo was the first to notice the change. She encouraged her mother not to spend all of it on food, but to set aside something, however small, for the future. That wisdom, spoken by a girl barely in her teens, became the foundation of their rise. The family began to plan, not just for the day, but for the months and years ahead. Kamsi's school fees, Ugo's learning opportunities, Oluchi's needs. Each coin saved had a purpose. Each sacrifice was tied to a dream. Their neighbors, who once mocked them, started to whisper a different tune, that Nneka's household was not just surviving, but building something extraordinary from the dust. Education became their collective goal, their beacon in the darkness. Ugo, though older, had missed several years of school due to their struggles, yet she refused to abandon her studies. She often sat outside classrooms, listening from the windows, taking in every lesson she could before rushing back to help her mother. Teachers noticed her hunger for knowledge and, impressed by her determination, allowed her to borrow books. She read late into the night by lantern light, her eyes heavy with fatigue but her mind wide awake with dreams. Kamsi, on the other hand, excelled formally once Nneka secured enough to send her back to school. Her brilliance stunned her teachers, who marveled at how quickly she grasped complex lessons. Awards and scholarships soon followed, easing some of the financial burden. Oluchi, still the baby of the family, absorbed everything around her like a sponge. She mimicked her sister's habits, scribbling letters on scraps of paper, determined not to be left behind. The little one's joy at writing her first full sentence lit up their modest home like sunshine breaking through the clouds. It was in those small victories, the borrowed books, the scholarships, the proud moments of learning, that hope flourished. And through it all, Nneka watched her daughters grow not just in knowledge but in character, knowing that her sacrifices were slowly turning into answered prayers. But with progress came greater sacrifices. To keep her daughters in school, Nneka often denied herself even the smallest comforts. There were weeks when she wore the same tattered wrapper until the seams threatened to fall apart, because every spare coin went into tuition fees, books, and uniforms. Ugo, too, sacrificed her youth, taking on side jobs after helping her mother. She sold sachet water in the blazing sun, carried firewood for customers, and sometimes went without food to ensure her sisters ate well enough to concentrate in class. Kamsi, though younger, began tutoring neighborhood children for a few coins, while Oluchi helped by doing chores for neighbors in exchange for pencils or notebooks. Every member of the family carried a piece of the burden, but none of them complained. Instead, they encouraged one another with words of faith and love. On nights when exhaustion weighed them down, Nneka would gather her daughters close and tell them stories of their father's ancestors, men and women who had overcome adversity. Though those stories sometimes brought tears, they also lit a fire within the girls to push harder. Slowly, the family's reputation shifted. They were no longer pitied but admired, not mocked but respected. The sacrifices, though painful, were building a foundation for a future none of them dared to imagine when they first slept on those cold church benches. Years slipped by, and with them came undeniable signs of change. Ugo, once the frightened teenager clutching her mother's wrapper, matured into a poised young woman whose leadership extended beyond her family. Her resilience became a model for other girls in the neighborhood, who looked up to her as proof that poverty was not the end of a story. Kamsi, with her academic brilliance, earned a scholarship that promised to take her education even further, opening doors the family had never dreamed of. Oluchi's creativity and determination began to shine as well, her quick wit and resourcefulness setting her apart in ways that hinted at a remarkable future. And Nneka, though the lines of hardship had deepened across her face and her body bore the marks of years of labor, stood taller than she had in her youth, her spirit radiant with fulfillment. For she had done the unthinkable. From rejection, poverty, and humiliation, she had raised daughters whose lives were beginning to blossom. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the victories, no matter how small, were undeniable. Their lives were no longer defined by tragedy but by perseverance, sacrifice, and an unyielding love that bound them together. What had begun as survival was now slowly transforming into triumph, laying the foundation for the greatness that was yet to come. 2 decades passed like the turning of a page, and the lives of Nneka's daughters became a living testimony to resilience and grace. The little girls who once clung to their mother's wrapper in fear had blossomed into women whose names carried weight across the nation. Ugo, the eldest, had carved a name for herself in the corridors of justice. From the days of listening outside classroom windows, she had risen to become one of the most respected lawyers in the country. Her voice now echoed in courtrooms, defending the oppressed with the same fire that had once burned when she shielded her sisters from ridicule. Journalists sought her opinion on national issues, and her face graced magazine covers that celebrated trailblazing women. Kamsi, the brilliant middle child, had pursued her education with unmatched zeal and had become a celebrated doctor. Her healing hands touched lives from the poorest villages to the grandest hospitals, and her name became synonymous with compassion and excellence. Oluchi, the youngest, transformed her childhood creativity into genius, becoming an award-winning engineer. Her projects reshaped communities, bridges, water systems, and schools bore the stamp of her brilliance. Together, these 3 women stood not only as symbols of success, but as living proof that adversity could birth greatness when met with faith, sacrifice, and perseverance. They girls built a beautiful house for their mother, and Nneka's joy knew no bound. While Nneka's daughters rose like stars, the fate of Obinna and the family he chose over them spiraled in the opposite direction. The wealth he had once flaunted dried up, squandered by reckless decisions and fueled by the entitlement of his relatives. The very people who mocked Nneka and her daughters drained him of his fortune, each demanding more until nothing remained. His brothers and cousins abandoned him once the money was gone, leaving him in a dilapidated house that echoed with loneliness. His health began to fail, his once strong frame reduced to frailty. The same neighbors who had witnessed him cast out his wife and daughters now shook their heads in pity, whispering about the irony of his downfall. Those who had once cheered his cruelty turned their backs on him in his hour of need. The arrogance that had driven him to discard his family gave way to regret, and regret gave way to despair. He would sit alone for hours, haunted by the laughter of the daughters he had rejected, realizing too late that true wealth was not in lands or cattle, but in the love of the children he had abandoned. For Nneka, the years of sacrifice had finally borne fruit in a way that humbled even her. Though her body carried the scars of toil, her spirit glowed with pride as she watched her daughters flourish. They had not only risen above their suffering, but had used it as fuel to touch countless lives. Their story inspired countless others who faced rejection and poverty. Nneka herself became a symbol of resilience, her name spoken with reverence in churches and communities that once turned her away. Mothers pointed to her and told their daughters, "If Nneka could rise, so can you." The story of the woman once humiliated at the gates of her husband's compound had become a parable of faith and perseverance. And while the world celebrated her children, Nneka knew that her true victory lay not in their fame, but in the love that still bound them together as family. They never forgot the nights on church benches or the hunger that once gnawed at them. Instead, they carried those memories as reminders of how far they had come. Obinna's downfall had been complete. The once proud man who cast away his wife and daughters for not bearing him a son was now a shadow of himself. His relatives, who had cheered his cruelty years before, abandoned him when his sickness grew worse and his pockets ran dry. Those who had once eaten at his table turned their backs, leaving him to rot in a lonely room that stank of regret and wasted pride. When he heard whispers of Nneka's daughters, Ugo the lawyer, Kamsi the doctor, Oluchi the engineer, his heart cracked with a pain he could not describe. The very children he despised had risen beyond the reach of those who mocked them, while he lay on a mat of shame. It was in this brokenness that Obinna swallowed his pride and sought them out, not with the arrogance of a man demanding recognition, but with the trembling voice of one who had nothing left but remorse. When Obinna appeared before Nneka, his body frail, his clothes ragged, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights, the weight of his sins hung thick in the air. He knelt before the woman he had humiliated, the woman he once abandoned without pity, and begged for forgiveness. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he clutched the hem of her wrapper, his voice cracking with desperation. "Nneka, I wronged you. I wronged our daughters. I let pride and foolishness destroy everything. Please, do not turn me away." Nneka's heart pounded as memories of the cold night he threw her into the streets with her little girls came rushing back. Her instinct was to push him aside, to let him drown in the same rejection he once showed her. Yet, her soul wrestled between bitterness and compassion. Days turned into weeks as Obinna lingered, showing humility she had never seen in him before. Slowly, her anger thawed. She finally agreed, not for love's sake, but for mercy's, to let him move into the house her daughters had built for her. Still, she made it clear. He was entering not as a master or husband, but as a broken man seeking shelter. The daughters' reaction was fiery and unyielding. Ugo, Kamsi, and Oluchi had carried the scars of their father's rejection for too long to pretend they could erase it with a single act of remorse. When Nneka told them of her decision, their voices rose with anger and pain. "Mama, we love you, and we will never deny you anything. But do not ask us to welcome him as our father. He lost that right the day he cast us out like strangers." Their words were sharp, their resolve unshakable. They agreed to provide for him, to ensure he would never lack food, clothing, or medical care, but they refused to ever call him Papa again. They told him to his face, their voices steady, their eyes burning with truth. "We forgive you, but we will never acknowledge you as our father." The silence that followed was heavy, but Obinna did not protest. For the first time in his life, he understood that forgiveness was not the same as reconciliation, and that some wounds, though healed, still left scars. And so, Obinna lived under the roof that his daughter's success had built, a man humbled beyond recognition. Nneka treated him with the dignity she believed every human deserved, but the closeness of husband and wife never returned. The daughters fulfilled their duty of care, but their distance remained a constant reminder of the past. In the community, people marveled at Nneka's mercy and the daughters' strength. They whispered that true greatness was not in wealth or titles, but in rising from ashes and setting boundaries that preserved dignity. The tale of Nneka's family became a living folktale, a warning against pride, a testimony of resilience, and a lesson that forgiveness does not erase consequences. Obinna spent the rest of his days surrounded by the very blessings he once despised, yet knowing he would never fully taste the sweetness of belonging. That was the price of his choices, and it was a price no man could bargain away. And so, Nneka and her daughters showed the world that love, faith, and perseverance can overcome even the deepest betrayal. From hardship to triumph, their journey reminds us that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the bonds we nurture and the courage we carry. Thank you for watching and sharing in this journey. Your love and support keep these stories alive. May your own path be filled with favor, peace, and the kind of love that never gives up. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I might just give you a shout out in the next story.